At 1:30 p.m. on December 7, 1941, Hawila Kaliohano stood in his front yard on Niihau Island, watching a damaged Zero fighter descend toward his village with smoke trailing from its engine. The pilot was Airman First Class Shigenori Nishikaichi, 22 years old, from Hiroshima, veteran of the China campaign with 47 combat hours. His aircraft had taken multiple hits during the attack on Pearl Harbor that morning. His fuel tanks were punctured, his radio destroyed, his compass shattered. He had maybe 90 seconds before complete engine failure. Kaliohano had been living on Niihau for 41 years. He knew every family, every field, every rock on this 70-square-mile island. The population was 136 people, almost all native Hawaiian, isolated from the outside world by the Robinson family, who owned the island and strictly controlled all access. No telephones, no electricity, no roads. The nearest help was 17 miles across the Kaulakahi Channel on Kauai. But Niihau had one thing that would change everything in the next 7 days. It had 3 Japanese residents. Nishikaichi's Zero slammed into a field 500 feet from Kaliohano's house at 1:32 p.m. The impact tore off the landing gear. The propeller shattered. The aircraft slid 200 feet through dry grass and stopped. The engine was still running. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The smell of burning oil and aviation fuel filled the air. Kaliohano ran toward the wreck. He reached it before the pilot could climb out. Nishikaichi was trapped in the cockpit, dazed, bleeding from a cut above his left eye. His flight suit was soaked with fuel. Kaliohano grabbed him under the arms and pulled him free. The pilot's weight was maybe 140 pounds. Kaliohano carried him 30 feet from the aircraft and set him down in the dirt. The Zero's engine finally died. The silence felt wrong. Kaliohano had never seen an airplane this close. He'd seen them flying overhead, distant specks heading to or from the military bases on Oahu, but never one on the ground. Never one that had just attacked his country, though he didn't know that yet. Other villagers arrived. Howard Kaliohano, Hawila's cousin. Benehakaka Kanahele, a ranch hand built like a bull, 51 years old. His wife Ella, their niece. Maybe 20 people within 5 minutes. They formed a circle around Nishikaichi, who sat in the dirt, not moving, not speaking, staring at his aircraft. Nobody knew what to do. The pilot was clearly military, clearly not American, clearly in trouble. But Niihau had no police, no military, no authority beyond Aylmer Robinson, who owned the island and lived on Kauai. The villagers had no communication with the outside world. The weekly supply boat wasn't due for 5 more days. Benehakaka Kanahele suggested they should restrain the pilot. Kaliohano disagreed. The man was injured, unarmed, no threat. They should help him, find out what happened, wait for instructions. The group debated in Hawaiian while Nishikaichi sat silent, understanding nothing. Then Ishimatsu Shintani arrived. He was 57 years old, born in Japan, moved to Hawaii 30 years ago, worked as a beekeeper on Niihau. He spoke Japanese. Kaliohano asked him to translate. Shintani approached Nishikaichi and spoke to him in Japanese. The conversation lasted maybe 30 seconds. Nishikaichi responded briefly. Shintani's face went pale. He turned to the villagers and said in broken English that the pilot was from a Japanese carrier, that there had been an attack on Pearl Harbor, that Japan and America were now at war. The villagers didn't believe him. War with Japan? Impossible. There must be some mistake. Maybe a training accident. Maybe the pilot was confused from the crash. Shintani must have misunderstood. But Kaliohano looked at the aircraft. He walked closer, examined the markings. The red circle on the fuselage. The green-gray camouflage. The machine guns mounted in the nose. The empty shell casings scattered in the cockpit. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the fuel. He walked back to the pilot and searched him. Found papers, maps, a pistol. The pistol was a Nambu Type 94 8mm, loaded, 1 round in the chamber. Kaliohano removed the magazine, ejected the round, put the weapon in his belt. Found more items. A silk map of Pearl Harbor with targets marked. A photograph of a woman, maybe the pilot's wife. A small package wrapped in rice paper. Kaliohano couldn't read Japanese. He couldn't read English either. He was illiterate in both languages, like most of the older generation on Niihau. But he understood maps. He understood weapons. He understood that this pilot had attacked something, and whatever he'd attacked was important enough to mark on a map. The villagers decided to hold Nishikaichi until Aylmer Robinson arrived. They took him to Kaliohano's house, gave him water, cleaned his wound, fed him. Shintani stayed to translate. The pilot ate poi, rice, fish. He was polite, quiet, kept looking toward his aircraft. That night, Robinson didn't come. The villagers expected him every Sunday evening to check on the ranch operations. But December 7th was different. Robinson was dealing with martial law on Kauai, checkpoints, blackouts, chaos. Niihau was the last thing on his mind. The villagers didn't know this. They waited. Nishikaichi waited. Shintani waited. Nobody slept much. Kaliohano kept the pilot's documents and pistol locked in a cabinet. He posted 2 men outside his house to watch. The night was quiet except for wind and distant waves. The next morning, December 8th, Robinson still hadn't come. The villagers held a meeting. Benehakaka Kanahele said they should send someone to Kauai to report what happened. Kaliohano agreed. They chose Howard Kaliohano and another man to take a boat across the channel. The 2 men left at dawn in a 16-foot whaleboat with a sail. They never made it. The channel was too rough, the wind too strong. They turned back after 5 hours, exhausted, soaked, nearly capsized twice. They reached Niihau at 2 p.m. and reported the failure. The villagers tried again the next day. Same result. The channel was impassable without a motor, and Niihau had no motorboats. Robinson provided everything the island needed, controlled all access, kept the population dependent and isolated. It was his policy, his island, his rules. Now those rules were a trap. By December 10th, Nishikaichi had been a prisoner for 3 days. He'd said nothing useful. Shintani had stopped translating. Something had changed between them. The villagers sensed it but didn't understand it. Shintani had told Nishikaichi about the Japanese community in Hawaii, about discrimination, about the uncertainty of their future now that war had started. The conversation had shifted from prisoner and translator to something else. Countrymen and countrymen. That night, Yoshio Harada came to Kaliohano's house. He was the 3rd Japanese resident of Niihau, 35 years old, born in Hawaii, American citizen, married to a native Hawaiian woman, spoke perfect English and Hawaiian. He'd been avoiding the situation, staying away from his house on the other side of the island. But now he arrived and asked to speak with Nishikaichi. Kaliohano allowed it. Harada and Nishikaichi spoke in Japanese for maybe 20 minutes. Then Harada turned to Kaliohano and made a request. He said the pilot needed his papers back. The documents that Kaliohano had taken from him. They were personal property, important to the pilot, no threat to anyone. Could Kaliohano please return them? Kaliohano said no. The papers stayed locked up until Robinson arrived. Harada left. The night passed. The next morning, December 11th, Harada returned with Shintani. They both asked for the documents. Offered money. Harada said he'd give Kaliohano $200 for the papers. That was 4 months' wages for a ranch hand. Kaliohano refused. Harada's tone changed. He said Kaliohano didn't understand the situation. Japan had won the war. Pearl Harbor was destroyed. The American fleet was gone. Japanese forces would land on Hawaii within days. When they arrived, Harada would be in charge of Niihau. He would remember who cooperated and who didn't. Kaliohano should think carefully about his choice. Kaliohano told him to leave. Harada and Shintani left, but Nishikaichi went with them. Nobody stopped them. The guards outside Kaliohano's house had gone to work in the fields. Kaliohano was inside. By the time he realized what happened, the 3 men were gone. Kaliohano grabbed the documents and the pistol and ran. He knew where to hide. There was a cave system in the cliffs on the west side of the island. Difficult to access, easy to defend. He'd played there as a child, knew every passage. He ran 5 miles carrying the documents, reached the caves, went inside, waited. The rest of the village learned what happened within an hour. Harada had taken Nishikaichi to the pilot's crashed Zero. They were trying to remove the machine guns. The aircraft had 2 Type 97 machine guns mounted in the nose, 7.7 millimeter, 500 rounds each. If they could get them working, they'd have firepower. Control, Benehakaka Kanahele went to confront them. Found Harada and Nishikaichi at the aircraft. Shintani was gone, disappeared, hiding somewhere. Kanahele demanded they stop. Harada pulled a shotgun from behind a fence post. A 12-gauge double barrel, loaded. He'd hidden it there earlier. He pointed it at Kanahele and told him to back away. Kanahele backed away, returned to the village, told everyone what happened. The entire population gathered. maybe 130 people. They decided to evacuate. Take the children, the elderly, the women to the other side of the island. Hide in the valleys. Wait for help. They left everything. Homes, belongings, livestock. Walked 12 miles to the remote valleys on the east side. Made camp in the rocks. Sent runners back to watch what Harada and Nishikaichi were doing. The runners reported that the two men had successfully removed one machine gun from the Zero. They'd also found ammunition, some still usable despite the crash. They'd set up a defensive position near Harada's house, taking items from abandoned village homes. Food, water, tools, kerosene lamps. That night, December 11th, Harada and Nishikaichi did something that would define the next 2 days. They went from house to house, systematically destroying things. Not looting, destroying. They smashed furniture, tore apart beds, dumped out food stores. But more importantly, they were looking for something. Kaliohano's house got special attention. They tore it apart, searching. Didn't find what they wanted, the documents, the pilot's papers. They needed them back. Whatever was in those documents was important enough to risk everything. The runners watched from hiding and reported back. The villagers debated their next move. Some wanted to rush Harada and Nishikaichi, overwhelm them with numbers. Others said that was suicide with a machine gun and shotgun. Better to wait for help. The boat from Kauai had to come eventually. December 12th arrived. 5 days since the crash, still no boat, still no contact with the outside world. Harada and Nishikaichi spent the day fortifying their position. They'd moved into Harada's house, barricaded the windows, set up the machine gun covering the approaches. But they were also preparing something else. The runners saw them carrying kerosene to different houses, stacking kindling, preparing fires. That night they found out why. At 8 p.m., flames appeared in the village. Harada and Nishikaichi were burning the houses, one by one, methodical, complete. They'd start a fire, wait until it was fully involved, move to the next house. The light was visible for miles. The smoke rose black against the stars. The message was clear. Give us the documents or we burn everything. Kaliohano stayed in his cave. He had food for maybe 3 days. Water from a spring inside the cave system. The documents were wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in a crevice. The pistol was in his belt, still unloaded. He had the magazine and ammunition, but didn't trust himself to load it correctly. He'd never fired a gun. By morning, December 13th, 16 houses were destroyed. The entire village center was ash. Only buildings on the outskirts remained. Harada's house, the church, a few storage sheds. The rest was gone. The villagers in the east valleys could see the smoke. They made a decision. Someone had to stop this. Someone had to fight back. Benehakaka Kanahele volunteered. His wife Ella insisted on going with him. They were both 51 years old, ranch workers, strong, fearless, angry about what had been done to their home. They walked back to the village in daylight. Didn't hide. Walked straight down the main path. Harada saw them coming from 400 yards away. He called out in Hawaiian, told them to stop. They kept walking. He fired the shotgun into the air. They kept walking. Nishikaichi appeared next to him with the machine gun. He didn't fire. Maybe the weapon wasn't working properly. Maybe he didn't want to kill civilians. Maybe Harada told him to wait. The Kanaheles reached the village center, stood in the ruins of their neighbor's house. Harada approached with the shotgun. Nishikaichi followed with the machine gun 30 feet back, providing cover. Harada spoke first, said he didn't want to hurt anyone. This wasn't about the villagers. This was between Japan and America. The villagers should stay out of it. Where was Kaliohano? Benehakaka said he didn't know. Probably off the island by now. Probably already told the military on Kauai what happened. Help was coming. Harada and Nishikaichi should surrender before it arrived. Harada laughed. Said no help was coming. The military had bigger problems. Pearl Harbor was destroyed. The Japanese Navy controlled the Pacific. Niihau didn't matter. He made one more offer. Tell us where Kaliohano is. We get the documents. We leave peacefully. Wait for the Japanese Navy to pick us up. Nobody else gets hurt. Benehakaka said no. Harada raised the shotgun, pointed it at Ella. His hands were shaking. He was 35 years old, had lived on Niihau for 15 years, married to a Hawaiian woman, part of this community. Now he was pointing a weapon at a woman he'd known for a decade. His face was wet with tears. He said he was sorry. He really was. But this was war. They had to understand. Japan had to win. Hawaii would be Japanese territory. It was inevitable. The villagers should accept it, cooperate, make it easier for everyone. Bene Hakaka took 3 steps forward, put himself between the shotgun and his wife, looked at Harada, looked at Nishikaichi behind him, made a calculation. The pilot was 22 years old, 140 pounds, injured, exhausted, hadn't slept properly in 6 days. He'd been shot at over Pearl Harbor, crashed his aircraft, been held prisoner, spent 2 days doing manual labor, removing weapons and burning buildings. He was at the end of his strength. Bene Hakaka was 51 years old, 215 pounds, worked cattle every day, could wrestle a steer to the ground by himself. His hands were the size of dinner plates. He'd broken 3 fingers in his life, kept working through all of them. Pain didn't stop him. He charged. Harada fired. The shotgun blast hit Bene Hakaka in the chest, left side, range of maybe 8 feet. The pellets tore through his shirt, penetrated the skin, cracked 2 ribs. Bene Hakaka stumbled, kept going, reached Harada in 2 more steps and grabbed the shotgun barrel with his left hand. Harada tried to pull it back. Couldn't. Bene Hakaka was too strong. He twisted the weapon, tore it from Harada's grip, threw it 20 feet away. Then he grabbed Harada by the throat with his right hand and lifted him off the ground. Nishikaichi raised the machine gun, tried to aim, couldn't get a clear shot. Bene Hakaka and Harada were too close together, moving, struggling. Nishikaichi ran forward, got to within 10 feet, aimed at Bene Hakaka's back. Ella Kanahele picked up a rock. It was maybe 5 pounds. Rough volcanic basalt, sharp edges. She threw it at Nishikaichi's head from 12 feet away, hit him in the temple. He went down. Bene Hakaka still had Harada by the throat. Harada was choking, clawing at Bene Hakaka's hand, turning purple. Bene Hakaka slammed him into the ground. Once, twice. Harada stopped moving. Nishikaichi got back up. His head was bleeding, probably a concussion, vision blurred. He pulled the Nambu pistol from his belt. Not Kaliahano's pistol. That one was still unloaded in the cave. This was a different weapon, must have been hidden in the Zero cockpit. Found when they removed the machine guns. He aimed at Bene Hakaka. Fired 3 times. All 3 shots hit. 1 in the right thigh. 1 in the groin. 1 in the abdomen. Bene Hakaka let go of Harada. Turned toward Nishikaichi. Took 2 steps forward. Nishikaichi fired again. Hit him in the chest. Right side. Bene Hakaka took another step. Nishikaichi fired again. The slide locked back. Empty. Bene Hakaka grabbed Nishikaichi by the collar with his left hand and the belt with his right hand. Lifted him off the ground like a child. The pilot weighed maybe 140 pounds. Bene Hakaka weighed 215. The weight difference didn't matter now. Bene Hakaka was running on pure rage and adrenaline, bleeding from 5 gunshot wounds, probably dying, didn't care. He turned and threw Nishikaichi into a stone wall 10 feet away. The impact shattered. Nishikaichi hit the wall headfirst. His skull cracked. He slid to the ground and didn't move. Bene Hakaka walked over to him, grabbed him by the head, picked him up, threw him into the wall again. The second impact broke Nishikaichi's neck. His body went limp. Bene Hakaka dropped him and turned to check on his wife. Ella was fine, standing, staring. Harada was on the ground, unconscious, breathing. Nishikaichi was dead. The entire fight lasted maybe 90 seconds. Bene Hakaka sat down. The adrenaline was fading. Pain was replacing it. His chest was on fire. His leg was numb. His abdomen felt wet. He looked down. His shirt was soaked red. The shotgun wound wasn't serious. The pellets hadn't penetrated deep. But the 5 pistol shots were a different story. Ella ran to him, pressed her hands against the worst wound, the one in his abdomen. Blood came through her fingers. She screamed for help. The other villagers who'd been hiding nearby came running. 6 men. They carried Bene Hakaka to the church, laid him on the floor, tried to stop the bleeding. Someone checked Nishikaichi. Dead. No pulse. His neck was bent at an angle that wasn't possible for living tissue. His skull was fractured, blood coming from his ears. Someone checked Harada. Still unconscious. Breathing shallow. They tied his hands and feet, left him there. The villagers focused on Benehakaka. He was losing blood fast. They had no medical supplies, no doctor, no way to remove the bullets. They packed the wounds with clean cloth, elevated his legs, gave him water. He stayed conscious, told them he was fine, told them to check on Ella. He lasted through the night, stayed alive by sheer stubbornness. At dawn on December 14th, he was weaker but still breathing. The villagers took turns staying with him, keeping pressure on the wounds, talking to him, keeping him awake. At 11:30 a.m., they heard an engine, a boat approaching. Finally, 7 days after the Zero crash, help arrived. It was Aylmer Robinson with a crew of soldiers from Kauai. They'd been trying to reach Niihau since December 8th, but weather and military restrictions had delayed them. They landed at the beach and saw the smoke from the burned village, ran inland expecting the worst, found the villagers at the church, found Benehakaka bleeding on the floor, found Nishikaichi's body, found Harada tied up, still unconscious. The soldiers took control of the situation, got the full story from multiple villagers, sent for a military doctor. Robinson went looking for Kaleohano, found him in the caves with the documents, brought him back. Kaleohano gave the papers to the soldiers. They examined them, found the Pearl Harbor attack plans, maps, codes, radio frequencies, details about the carrier force, intelligence that could help understand Japanese tactics, capabilities, intentions. The military doctor arrived by seaplane at 3 p.m., examined Benehakaka. 5 gunshot wounds, multiple broken ribs, significant blood loss, probable internal injuries. He was alive but critical. They needed to evacuate him to a hospital on Kauai immediately. They loaded Benehakaka into the boat. Ella went with him. The crossing took 90 minutes. They arrived at Kauai at 5 p.m. and rushed him to Waimea Hospital. He went into surgery at 6 p.m. The surgeons removed 4 bullets. 1 in his thigh, 1 in his groin, 2 in his abdomen. The 5th bullet, the one in his chest, was too close to his heart to remove safely. They left it there. Benehakaka survived the surgery, survived the recovery, survived the infection that came a week later. He was built too strong to die from bullets. Harada regained consciousness on the boat to Kauai. He was arrested, charged with treason, imprisoned. But he never made it to trial. On December 15th, guards found him dead in his cell. He'd torn his shirt into strips and hanged himself. The note he left said he was ashamed of what he'd done, ashamed of betraying his neighbors, ashamed of choosing his ancestry over his home. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Kauai. Shintani was found hiding in one of the valleys on December 16th. He'd spent 5 days alone, eating raw sweet potatoes, drinking from streams, terrified. He was arrested and interrogated. Claimed he'd tried to talk Harada and Nishikaichi out of their plan, claimed he'd refused to help them, claimed he'd hidden because he feared for his life. The villagers confirmed parts of his story. He'd disappeared before the violence started. He'd never been armed. He'd never burned any houses. He was imprisoned anyway, spent the entire war in an internment camp on Oahu, never returned to Niihau, died in 1948 at age 64, alone, still apologizing to anyone who would listen. Nishikaichi's body was examined by military intelligence. They documented his injuries, took photographs, removed his personal effects, found a small package in his flight suit that had survived the crash and the fight. It contained a lock of black hair wrapped in silk paper, probably from his wife. The photograph Kaleohano had found earlier was also of a young woman. She was never identified. The military sent a report of Nishikaichi's death to Japan through neutral channels. No response came. His body was buried in a military cemetery on Oahu with other enemy dead. No marker, just a numbered plot. In 1956, after the war ended and relations normalized, Japanese officials requested the return of remains. Nishikaichi's body was exhumed, identified through dental records, repatriated to Japan. His family held a funeral in Hiroshima. His wife attended. She'd remarried in 1944, believing him dead. She was 38 years old, had 2 children from her second marriage. She told the press that Nishikaichi was a good man who'd done his duty. She didn't answer questions about the Niihau incident. The documents Kaleohano saved were analyzed by Navy intelligence. They contained detailed information about the Pearl Harbor attack, including approach routes, target priorities. communication protocols, and post-attack rendezvous coordinates. The intelligence helped fill gaps in understanding what had happened on December 7th. Some of the information led to changes in defensive tactics and early warning procedures. Kaleo Hano received no recognition for saving the documents. No medal, no commendation, no mention in official reports. The military classified the entire incident. Reporters who tried to investigate were stonewalled. The official line was that the pilot had crashed, been captured, died while trying to escape. No mention of Harada. No mention of the battle. No mention of the burned village. The reason was simple. The Niihau incident created a problem. It suggested that Japanese residents in Hawaii might be loyal to Japan, might help enemy forces, might be a security threat. This supported the argument for mass internment of Japanese Americans. Military and political leaders didn't want to publicize a case that would inflame racial tensions and justify extreme measures. So the story was buried. The villagers were told not to talk about it. Kaleo Hano was told not to talk about it. Benihakaka was told not to talk about it. The incident became classified, filed away, forgotten by everyone except the people who lived through it. The Niihau incident did have one major impact. It directly influenced the decision to implement Executive Order 9066, which authorized the forced relocation and internment of 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Military officials cited Harada's actions as evidence that American citizens of Japanese ancestry couldn't be trusted in wartime. They argued that if a second-generation Japanese American who was married to a native Hawaiian and lived in an isolated community would still help an enemy pilot, then Japanese Americans in general were a threat. This logic was flawed. Harada was one person. His actions didn't represent an entire community. But in the fear and paranoia after Pearl Harbor, evidence didn't matter. The Niihau incident became a classified justification for one of the worst civil rights violations in American history. The irony was that most Japanese Americans proved fiercely loyal to America during the war. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed entirely of Japanese American soldiers, became the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. They fought in Europe while their families were imprisoned in camps. They earned 18,000 individual decorations, including 21 medals of honor. Their loyalty was never in question among those who served with them. But the policymakers who decided on internment never saw that loyalty. They only saw Harada. Back on Niihau, life slowly returned to normal. The burned village was rebuilt over the next year. New houses went up, simple structures made of wood and corrugated metal. The population grew back to 140 by 1945. The incident became something the older generation didn't talk about, and the younger generation didn't fully understand. Benihakaka, Kanahele, recovered from his wounds. He was released from the hospital in February 1942, returned to Niihau in March, went back to work as a ranch hand. He walked with a slight limp from the thigh wound. The bullet in his chest stayed there for the rest of his life. He could feel it sometimes when he bent certain ways. Didn't bother him much. In 1945, after the war ended and classification restrictions eased, a reporter from Honolulu finally got the full story. He interviewed Benihakaka, Ella, Kaleo Hano, and a dozen other villagers, wrote a long article for the Honolulu Advertiser. The article called Benihakaka a hero, said he'd prevented a Japanese foothold in Hawaii, said he'd fought with the courage of ancient Hawaiian warriors. The article embarrassed Benihakaka. He told the reporter he wasn't a hero. He was just protecting his wife and his home. Anyone would have done the same. The reporter asked about the fight, about the moment he grabbed Nishikaichi. Benihakaka said he didn't remember much. It happened fast. He was angry. The pilot had shot him. He reacted. The reporter asked if he felt bad about killing Nishikaichi. Benihakaka thought for a long time before answering. Said he felt bad about the whole situation. The pilot was young, probably had a family, was just following orders. Harada was a neighbor, probably felt trapped between two identities, made a terrible choice. The whole thing was a tragedy that didn't need to happen. But given the same situation again, Benihakaka would do the same thing. His wife's life mattered more than philosophy. The article ran on the front page. It led to official recognition. The military awarded Benihakaka the Medal of Merit and the Purple Heart. The ceremony was held on Niihau in 1946. A small group of officers came by boat, presented the medals, took photographs, left. Bene Hakaka put the medals in a drawer and went back to work. Ella received no medal. Her role in the fight, throwing the rock that knocked down Nishikaichi, wasn't mentioned in the official reports. This was 1946. Women weren't recognized for combat actions. The military narrative focused on Bene Hakaka as the lone hero. Ella knew the truth. Bene Hakaka knew the truth. That was enough. Kaliohano also received recognition, delayed but meaningful. In 1960, the Navy awarded him a commendation for safeguarding classified documents under difficult circumstances. The ceremony was quiet, no press, held at a military base on Kauai. Kaliohano was 78 years old by then, still living on Niihau, still unable to read the documents he'd saved. The commendation noted that the intelligence from Nishikaichi's papers had contributed to understanding Japanese naval tactics and had potentially saved American lives in subsequent battles. It didn't specify how many lives or which battles. The information remained classified until 1975. When the full story was finally declassified and researchers could access the original documents, they found detailed attack plans, communication codes, and operational procedures that had helped naval intelligence break additional Japanese codes and predict fleet movements. Some historians credited this intelligence with contributing to American victories at Coral Sea and Midway. Others said the impact was minimal, that the intelligence arrived too late to affect those battles. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Bene Hakaka Kanahele continued working on Niihau until 1963. He was 73 years old when he finally retired. His body was wearing out. The bullet wounds had left scar tissue that caused chronic pain. The broken ribs had never healed quite right. He moved stiffly, breathed with difficulty, tired easily, but he still worked his small garden, still helped neighbors with heavy lifting, still fixed things that broke. He died on October 3, 1965, at age 75. Heart failure, probably related to the bullet that remained lodged near his heart for 23 years. He was buried in the Niihau cemetery overlooking the ocean. His grave marker listed his name, birth date, death date, and one word, hero. He would have hated that. But Ella insisted, and nobody argued with Ella. Ella Kanahele lived until 1985. She died at age 95, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She'd spent the last 40 years telling the story of the Niihau incident to anyone who asked, and many who didn't. She made sure people knew that Bene Hakaka hadn't fought alone, that she'd been there too, that the women of Niihau had been just as brave as the men. She made sure history remembered. Hawaiian Kaliohano died in 1968 at age 86. He never left Niihau after the incident. Never wanted to. The island was his home, his life, his identity. He was buried next to Bene Hakaka in the cemetery. His grave marker mentioned his role in the incident. Saved documents. December 1941. Simple. True. The Zero fighter remained in the field where it crashed until 1943. The military finally sent a team to remove it. They found the aircraft stripped of anything useful. The villagers had taken parts over the 2 years. Sheet metal for roofing, aluminum for cookware, wiring for fences, control cables for clotheslines. By the time the military arrived, only the basic airframe remained. They loaded it onto a barge and transported it to Oahu. The wreckage was analyzed for intelligence purposes. Photographed, documented, then scrapped. No pieces were preserved. The metal went into the war effort, melted down, reformed, turned into American aircraft. In the 1990s, a Japanese researcher interested in the Pacific War began investigating the Niihau incident. He tracked down records, interviewed survivors, contacted families. He found Nishikaichi's daughter, who was born in 1942, 3 months after her father died. She'd grown up not knowing anything about him except that he'd been killed in the war. The researcher told her the full story. She traveled to Niihau in 1998 and met with the descendants of Bene Hakaka and Ella Kanahele. The meeting was emotional, difficult, healing. Both families shared their stories, their grief, their understanding that the incident was a tragedy created by war, not by individual evil. The families became friends. They exchanged letters. The Japanese family sent gifts every December 7th. The Niihau family sent back photos and stories about life on the island. Neither family blamed the other. Both recognized that Nishikaichi, Benehakaka, Harada, all of them were caught in forces beyond their control. In 2001, on the 60th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, the families held a joint memorial ceremony on Niihau. It was private, no press, just family members and a few close friends. They honored Nishikaichi, Benehakaka, Harada, all the victims of that confused and violent week. They planted 3 trees on the site where the Zero had crashed. 1 for each man who died. The trees are still there. They've grown tall now, visible from the ocean. Niihau remains isolated. The Robinson family still owns it, still controls access, still maintains the population at around 150 people. Tourists can visit on expensive helicopter tours but can't stay overnight. The island has electricity now, powered by solar panels and generators. It has satellite internet, limited and expensive. It has a medical clinic staffed by a nurse. But it's still mostly the same as it was in 1941. Quiet, remote, forgotten by most of the world. The site where the battle happened is marked now, a simple plaque installed in 2011 by the National Park Service. It tells the basic story. Pilot crashed, took hostages, died in struggle, omits the complicated parts, doesn't mention Harada's suicide, doesn't mention the intelligence value of the documents, doesn't mention the impact on internment policy. Just the simple story. Hero defeats enemy. End. That's how most history works. The complicated truth gets simplified into narrative that fits on a plaque. The Niihau incident was complicated. A young pilot following orders. A second-generation immigrant caught between 2 identities. A village defending itself. A man fighting to protect his wife. A woman fighting beside him. None of them wanted to be there. None of them wanted it to end the way it did. But war doesn't care about wants. The lessons from Niihau are uncomfortable. It showed that isolation isn't protection. It showed that loyalty is complicated when you have ties to both sides of a conflict. It showed that fear can drive terrible policy decisions. It showed that violence can emerge from peaceful communities when pushed far enough. It showed that heroism often comes from ordinary people in impossible situations. Most importantly, it showed that the home front wasn't safe. Americans in 1941 believed the war was happening elsewhere. Europe, Asia, distant places. Then a Japanese pilot crashed on a tiny Hawaiian island and suddenly the war was in someone's backyard, literally. The psychological impact was enormous. If Niihau wasn't safe, nowhere was safe. That fear drove much of the war's homefront policy. The internment camps, the civil defense drills, the blackouts, the rationing, the constant state of alert, all of it traced back to the realization that the enemy could appear anywhere. And the Niihau incident was the first proof. Historians still debate what would have happened if Harada had refused to help Nishikaichi. Would the pilot have survived peacefully until rescue? Would he have stolen a boat and tried to escape? Would he have died from his injuries? There's no way to know. Harada made his choice, and that choice changed everything. The incident also raises questions about Robinson's management of Niihau. The isolation he maintained made communication impossible during the critical first days. If the island had a telephone or radio, the military would have arrived immediately. Nishikaichi would have been taken prisoner. Harada would have had no opportunity to help. The entire crisis would have ended peacefully, but Robinson valued isolation over connectivity. He believed the traditional Hawaiian lifestyle needed protection from modern influence. That philosophy had benefits. Niihau preserved language, culture, and traditions that disappeared elsewhere in Hawaii. But it also had costs. And in December 1941, those costs included fire, violence, and death. Robinson never publicly acknowledged any mistakes. He continued managing Niihau the same way until his death in 1967. His descendants still manage it the same way today. The isolation continues. The philosophy continues. Whether that's good or bad depends on your perspective. What's certain is that the Niihau incident remains unique. It was the only battle fought on Hawaiian soil during World War II. The only, place where civilians fought and died defending American territory against Japanese forces. The only place where an American citizen actively helped the enemy. The only place where a downed enemy pilot successfully evaded capture for more than a few hours. It deserves to be remembered not as a simple story of heroes and villains, but as a complex moment when ordinary people faced impossible choices and did what they thought was right. Some of those choices were brave, some were tragic. All of them mattered. That's how real history works. Not through grand strategy or famous generals, but through individuals in small places doing their best in bad situations. Benehakaka Kanahele was one of those individuals. So was Ella. So was Kaleohano. So was Nishikaichi. So was Harada. All of them were caught in something bigger than themselves. All of them shaped what happened next. All of them deserve to be remembered, not as simple symbols, but as complete human beings. The Niihau incident teaches us that war isn't just battles and strategy. It's people, it's choices, it's consequences. And sometimes those consequences last decades, affecting communities and policies and lives in ways nobody predicted. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten histories from World War II and beyond. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold stories. Each one matters, each one deserves to be remembered, and we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Hawaii to Japan, from military historians to descendants of those who lived through the war. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.